I want to examine with you today pretty quickly one of the most ambitious but little known acts of spiritual hijacking that has ever happened, where you have these Christian authors that are rewriting the words of female pagan prophets to have them predict Jesus. And these aren't just anonymous writings. These are prophecies that were claimed by early church fathers to prove their religion. This is what happens when you have a religion that seeks ancient validation to prop itself up. It has to create it. It has to steal it. It would be like if today the Scientologists rewrote the ancient Greek myths, because there's this kind of respect and awareness around the Greek myths, to have L. Ron Hubbard inserted into the texts as a prophesied god, and claimed that the oracle at Delphi had predicted Dianetics. What I'm about to share with you today is literally that ridiculous, but because it happened a long time ago, many believers today don't know about it, and it doesn't have that same weight or punch as if we saw it happening in real time. So today we're going to talk about the Sibyls. You may have heard of them, you may have not, but I'm going to encourage you today to stick around because, again, I think many people don't know about this distinction, this event, these happenings, and the reason I want to share them with you is because it just goes to show that some things never change. Essentially, you have apologetics that have always been happening to some degree for this religion. We see it so early, even with Paul or the Gospel of John, that are trying to make things work that weren't working because of the combination and the contradiction and the differences between morphine religions and different social and cultural influences. And it's just always been that way. As dishonest as I see modern day apologetics, you're going to see that the early church fathers were purposefully creating forgeries when they knew better. And we'll get into how we know all of that, but let's start with the Sibyls themselves. Picture, if you can, in the 6th century BCE, a woman standing at the mouth of a cave, her hair wild, her eyes wide. She speaks in lovely riddles, her voice is echoing, but powerful. She is feared. She is revered. Her words are written down. They're treasured. They're consulted by those in power, by the emperor himself, and they're passed on across centuries. But one day, her words change. A new god seems to appear in them, a dying and rising god, one who's born of a virgin, one who is nailed to a cross. And just like that, what once was a pagan prophetess is now a mouthpiece for Christianity. These are female oracles that are said to speak with inspiration from the divine, often from Apollo himself. The tradition began in pre-Hellenistic Greece, so again 6th century BCE is as far back as we can track it, and it continued on and was spread well into the Roman world. And unlike the organized priesthood, Sibyls were freelance visionaries, mystics that didn't serve the temple. No, they served God directly. They were often outsiders, seen as half divine, maybe someone to be feared, maybe someone to be intrigued by, usually unmarried and even celibate, and operating and acting out of these liminal spaces, the caves, the forests, the mountains, etc. And each region had its own Sibyl. Some of these you'll be more familiar with than others. There were many, but there's a main few that we will focus on. The most famous is the Cumaean Sibyl in Cumae near Naples, and she is consulted by the Roman state. You have the Delphic Sibyl, which is sometimes confused with the oracle at Delphi. It's not the same. And then you have the Arthurian Sibyl. This one is most often later associated with Christian reinterpretations, and still many others, Persia and Libya and so on. And many people, I think, have a misunderstanding of what they were, what their position was. They weren't mad. They weren't thought to be mad. They had that spark of divine madness, but that was very different. And they weren't there to guide you or to offer advice. They simply offered fate, but it was powerful and it was respected. So let's move on to our next part here, and we need to make a very important distinction if you're going to understand what really happened. You have the Sibylline books and the Sibylline oracles. These two things are not the same. So first we have the Sibylline books. These come before. These are the Roman states books, again, not the oracles, and they were a collection of prophecies that were actually sold to Rome by the Cumaean Sibyl during the reign of King Tarquin the Proud, which we know is the 6th 6th century BCE. These books are stored in the Temple of Jupiter, and they are consulted only during crisis, war, plague, famine. But they were burned in a fire in 83 BCE, and this huge project goes out to collect any remnants or scraps and redo it, and we have that for a while, and then that gets lost also. So we know of these in practice. We know what people like Virgil spoke about them, how they were used, when they were used, little excerpts of what was said, but we don't have any of them left. They're state-sanctioned documents, though. They were sacred and they were secret. And again, only accessed by the elites during times of severe emergency. Then you have the Sibylline Oracles. These are very different. It's a collection of Greek prophetic poems, and again, yes, they're in writings or book form, so you have to be careful when you say Sibylline books versus Sibylline oracles that are also written down in books. But these are composed much later, between the 2nd century BCE and all the way into the 7th century CE. They're written on purpose in the same kind of voice and use as the Sibyls, but they weren't composed by Sibyls or anyone witnessing the Sibyls. They were composed by Jewish and later Christian authors, pretending to be Sibyls. Again, we are trying to add ancient validation to the religion by, after the fact, smuggling very specific words and prophecies and other forms of proof into the pagan prophets of old. The easiest way to win a debate: look, even your pagan prophets have been speaking about our Lord Jesus Christ. It was always there. It was right in front of you. You just didn't have the context for it. It's a lie. And by the way, it's the same kind of lie that has happened in many other religions, and the same kind of lie that has since continued to happen within Christianity, even into the modern day. We'll talk about that here in just a minute also. But I think the next thing we should do is move into some examples. What was kind of originally written in the Sibylline books, and then how it was rewritten, stolen, manipulated, and changed to serve Christianity. And I'm just going to give you a few, but there are indeed many. So let's give some examples, and we'll start with probably the most obvious one, the most overtly Christian moment in the oracles, the Jesus fish acrostic. Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior in Greek. We talked about this before when we talked about Christian symbols. This is the ichthys, and it is written in the voice of the Arthurian Sibyl, claiming to foretell Jesus's divine identity. But scholars agree it could not have been written before the 3rd century CE, which, as we should all know, is centuries after the event that it is supposedly predicting. The scholars can see where it's trying to imitate the style of Sibylline verse, but it breaks meter and vocabulary norms to such a degree that it's obvious this is a later addition, trying to be framed as ancient prophecy when that's not what it is. And again, this shouldn't be surprising. We have it in the canon itself. There are books that are clearly written after the events that are supposed to be prophesied within them. People are always trying to give gravitas, trying to give weight to their beliefs. Another example would be the Solar King example that happens in book 3. I think there's 14 books. I need to check that. But this one was most likely written by a Jewish author in the 2nd century CE. Here we have a lamenting of foreign domination, calls for a divine justice to come, and references to a righteous ruler that is on the way to set everything straight, to restore order. Then we have the Christian edition, which, quote, "Then shall a king come from the sun, appearing from the east." This imagery was retrofitted to match Jesus, who was also referred to as the light and rising from the east. Early Christians being sure to point to Matthew 2:2. We saw his star in the east. But it's misleading because, first of all, the original Jewish intent was likely referring to more of a military or political liberator, not a divine Messiah. And even on its own, it's really fascinating to see multiple times, not just this inference, of the from the sun motif that was pagan or symbolic be later baptized into Christianity with its light and dawn metaphors. Book 6 gives us the crucified man. We'll do this for our 3rd example. And quote, "Blessed is he among men who shall stretch out his hands and be nailed upon the tree." It's suspicious for a few reasons. One, this line doesn't appear in any pre-Christian text, not the pagans, not the Jews. And the style and the theology match very well on to a 2nd or even 3rd century CE Christian Christian apocalyptic kind of writing, not classical oracle form. So here you have Christians claiming that even a pagan female oracle prophet was predicting Jesus, and not just him, but even the manner of his death. But this is prophecy after the fact. Vaticinian ex eventu. They even have a term for it because, again, it happens so often. It's the only way to make prophecy happen other than occasional luck and numbers game. And it's just poetical phrasing meant to map onto the crucifixion details while still trying to sound ancient and mystical. Maybe just two more examples here because I think you get it. But again, I also think it's really interesting. So let's talk about the numbered kingdoms and the final king. The oracles speak of 4 great kingdoms and a 5th bringing final justice. The Christian reinterpretation is echoing books like Daniel with the statues of empires, Persia, Greece, Babylon, and Rome. Christians used this to claim that Rome was the final great pagan empire, and that then Christ's kingdom was the eternal 5th coming. Again, the original oracle, this one being Jewish written, was likely Jewish apocalyptical literature, reacting to real-world oppression at that time, not future prophetic events, but Christians repurposed the structure. It wasn't a prophecy, it was editing. Jesus was simply spliced into someone else's apocalypse, which, by the way, is why I'm talking about this. Again, once you can see how man-made this is, the evolution of this religion, the borrowing that it had to do to become the one true perfect religion is hilariously telling and hopefully can help many of you doubting or deconstructing. Let's do one more example here about the virgin birth that is forced into all of this. And quote, "And a pure maiden shall bear a child, and he shall be called Emmanuel." It's familiar, I'm sure, to you because it is clearly echoing Isaiah 7 and Matthew 1. But this wasn't from a Sibyl. No pre-Christian Sibylline text ever mentions a virgin birth, period. The phrase is a Christian interpolation, likely added around the 3rd century CE to align with gospel narratives. The phrasing matches much more to the Septuagint kind of Greek than the auricular Greek. This is more than just inserting Jesus. It's mirroring biblical phrasing to such an obvious copying degree to retroactively verify the Gospels. Again, cheating, lying. So we'll move on to the next section here. I want to just speak quickly on how we know some of this stuff and why we can know that these are actual forgeries and not just misunderstandings, though I'm sure in some cases there were just misunderstandings and people working with the available text in front of them, but in other cases, no. This is purposely being written after the fact as if it's written in the ancient past, and that is the opposite of truth. So that is actually the first point I want to make, that we know by many things that I'm about to get into when it was written, and then to have an event that had already happened in the past shows that this is purposely being done retroactively, like with the rise and fall of Roman emperors Nero and Hadrian, or the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, or the coming of Jesus, or his death, or his resurrection. So prophecy after the fact, that's first. Second is styling, it's voice. The earliest books, like books 1 and 2, reflect Jewish monotheism and pagan rhythm, warning against idolatry and praising a single god. The later books shift to explicit Christian doctrine, virgin birth, cross and resurrection, final judgment by the Son of God, that acrostic for Jesus, like not even being subtle anymore. Third is we can date the manuscripts and trace the editions. Scholars can do what is known as textual analysis, which is based on like 20 other schools of science. It's just fantastic to understand how we can gain so much insight into history from just words on a page. But you can look at the vocab and the grammar and even the theological ideas or concepts at the time. You can compare it up against other Jewish apocalyptic or Christian writings. Heck, they can even isolate the Jewish sections, kind of pre-70 CE, from the later Christian interpolations, the 2nd through 4th century CE. Often these Christian verses are inserted directly into otherwise Jewish texts. It's just right there. It's like this crazy broken puzzle piece. And you might think, I don't know, how well can they actually know this? But we're talking centuries of change, and this is still the case today. It's only been a couple centuries since like our founding fathers, but how out of place might a modern text message look as some kind of correspondence recording between Ben Franklin and John Adams? We would be able to see this so clearly for what it is, and so can scholars today about what they're seeing back then. And then just a fourth example here might be how the early church fathers quoted them, but only after they were written. Church fathers like Justin Martyr, Theophilus of Antioch, and Augustine quote Sibylline Oracles to prove that Jesus was foretold, but they never quote the earlier Roman Sibylline books, because those were already gone. They quote the newer oracles written in Greek, claiming they were ancient pagan prophecy when they could not have been. It's an early Christian strategy, unfortunately. We just have too many examples to continue to give the benefit of the doubt. Use pagan authority to validate Christian theology. It gave them cultural legitimacy. It was a great tool to convert pagans, and it was proof that Jesus was expected all along. This was always the case. We knew it. You guys knew it even. This has just been so clear. Now we have the fulfillment in Christ. It's a great game plan, especially in ancient times where you have a very small group of people that control all the information and hardly any opposition. And even the opposition you do have doesn't have the tools of science, history, and archaeology to suss out what has happened. And this is just a slow building of all of the issues that come with early Christianity. But I've been alluding to this a bit more lately, like 2 Thursdays ago where we covered Origen, a very prominent early church father that had some really crazy things he believed that are mutually exclusive to other crazy things that other early church fathers believed. Some that could be biblically backed up and some that definitely cannot. And then you see a bunch of the church fathers purposely pulling from things that they would have known couldn't have actually been true early pagan sources of prophecy, but it didn't matter because it works for them. It's an agenda. They can move the mission forward by any means necessary, which again is the opposite of truth. It's more man-made deceitfulness, dressed up and disguised to be something that it is not. History is not made of facts for the most part. It is made of edits. And here we see an edit that Christians have been doing for a very, very long time. Conquer, suppress, take credit. Ancient pagan women once spoke for the gods, free and wild and revered. But then Christianity conquers. It rises to power. Those voices get muzzled. They get repurposed and made not to speak for Apollo any longer, but now for Christ. Belief systems like Christianity rewrite history to justify their very existence, to justify themselves. And I wonder how many Christians even know this. I mean, if you're a Christian who happens to be watching this, is this news to you that Christians used known, forged pagan prophecies to convert others to Christ? If you did know about it, why does it not bother you? If you know about it and you find it to actually be true, that I'm not just making this up, does that change anything for you? Or is it just another damning piece of evidence against Christianity that you'll sweep under the rug and say, well, not every part of Christianity is great, but that's the man-made parts. The whole thing isn't man-made. Some men are going to misconstrue truth and abuse it, and it's probably just the devil trying to confuse us and deceive us and get in our ways. I know my God, I know my Jesus, and I know he's real, and I know that his real followers wouldn't really do these things, and so if these things happened, well, then, that doesn't really mean anything, then does it? But how many pieces of evidence against Christianity will it take before you say, hey, maybe this is as real as all the other man-made religions that have the same holes and problems in them that I don't believe in? When does that happen? How many passes will I give the all-powerful, most perfect creator of the universe who wants a personal relationship with me and desires that I am not lost? How many times do I make excuses for him in the light of these clear issues? Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited for Sunday's video. It's going to be another podcast episode. I have a wonderful guest. We had a topic in mind. We do get to that topic, but man, we hit on a bunch of really other interesting stuff before we get there, and I'm excited for you guys to see that. Until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast, Anne, Boris, Grant, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, and Shawn, my Humanist heroes, Craig, James, Jarrod, Christy, and Matthew, my Atheist advocates, Aquitar, Caleb, Dan, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas, as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel, please consider joining these fine people.